Welcome to SportX. Today I'm joined by Luke Potter, a paddle coach and founder of Sports Essence online shop. And Luke is also a director of A1Padel Tour in South Africa. Let's start off by describing what inspired you to establish Sports Essence Paddle Academy and how it was to train over 100 coaches and how did it help elevate the standard of paddle coaching in South Africa. Welcome, Luke.
Hi, thanks very much, Gerard, for having us today. Like everybody else, I fell into paddle 4 years ago. It's a very new sport, let's call it, to South Africa, but certainly not a sport that has been new to the world. It's been around since 1969, in fact. And I mean, it's really, only over the last 10 years, really grown specifically throughout Europe and now has taken the world by storm. So, just prior to COVID, in fact, somebody picked up a phone and introduced me to the game. And, I saw a great opportunity and effectively I opened up a sports store and we wanted to start selling paddles. The problem with it is that unfortunately, there was no one playing. So I had a whole bunch of paddles, but with no one to sell them to. So, the only way that I could get people to start playing was obviously to start coaching myself. And that's where my journey began. And through that, we had to grow the sport from 0 people playing with 2 or 3 courts to over 600 courts in South Africa at the moment, though. So, I mean, you can see that growth over the last 4 years has been exponential. It's really been something. So for me personally, I played on the tour because remember back then, the pool of players wasn't really big. So we started the ball rolling. We did a deal with Tennis South Africa. We established South African Padel Association. We wrote a constitution. We picked a national side. We did what we call nationals. We had 2 of those. I went off to Egypt. I captained the South African paddle side there. We got killed because obviously we're so far behind everybody else. And when I got back, I played in the A1Padel Tour, which back then was called the APT. And I then knew my journey was not to be a player myself. My journey was to try and upskill coaches, which in turn would then upskill players. And eventually, hopefully after 10 years, we could maybe get a kid that's probably 10 years old now or 15 years old now on the global tour that was able to really make a difference from a paddle South African point of view. And the starting point with that was to start a paddle academy, which obviously is what you refer to, the Sports Essence Paddle Academy. So our role is to try and find coaches, upskill them, and in turn then obviously feed the whole ecosystem of making people better at paddle.
Okay, great. So, Luke, as the director of A1Padel Tour, the business side of the sport in South Africa, tell us more about it.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, again, 1 court to 600 courts, you can understand the commercial side of this is huge. There's massive opportunity for people selling paddles, sports equipment, courts themselves. I mean, if you think about it, a court can be anything between, anything between 250,000 to R1 million a court. We've already got 600 of them. So you can imagine the job creation, the influx of money coming into our economy that paddle has created. If you think about it, 4 years ago, we had none of this. The only thing that we had was tennis that effectively was more or less a dying sport in South Africa. Now people are picking up paddles left, right, and center, and there's a rekindlance and a rebuilding of racket sports again, which is amazing. A1Padel is a global tour. So, it costs a hell of a lot of money to put this thing on, but also generates a lot of money on the back end. Not only does it do that, but it brings in foreign players, which then obviously inspires the youth to want to play like these guys. But not only that, it also brings in foreign coaches. And that coaching and upskilling also, again, strengthens the ecosystem. So that is why A1Padel is such an important thing to us as a country. So to keep a license for A1Padel, it costs, give or take, probably between 1 and 3 million rand. and there's prize money, and there's all these types of things that you've got to cater for. So to host a tournament of that magnitude, let's call it, you're probably in for about 10 million, give or take, just to host. Then, of course, you've got to make your money back. So to run a tournament like that, you need things like sponsorship, you need buy-in, you need a lot of things to go right for you to run it successfully.
So by getting involved with the sport very early on in your career, you managed to co-direct the A1Padel series in Sweden and commented for A1 on ESPN. How has that international experience influenced your perspective on the future growth of paddle in South Africa?
Yeah, well, look, I think it's going overseas and seeing exactly what they've done, learning from their mistakes. Remember, they're going on exactly the same journey as what we are. A country like Sweden, for example, they did exactly the same thing we did. They started off in very small, and then it sprouted really big. The difference between us and Sweden is they got to critical mass quite quickly. They moved from 0 courts to 1,000 courts during COVID. Because no one, there was nothing to do there. So they would start playing paddle. The issue that happened there, for example, is after COVID, 50% of the market shrunk and they lost 500 courts. Now, that's a learning, right? So we want to come back and say, okay, cool. Well, how quickly are we going to get to this critical mass that we're referring to? And when will the shrinkage happen? The biggest learning for me is that in South Africa, we haven't even touched schools yet. We haven't got leagues. We haven't got any of these things. That's still going to grow. Let's call it this love for this game. So are we anywhere close to saturation point? No, we're not. There's massive opportunity economically and for the game itself here. That's the first learning. The second learning is South Africa really has got good people. We are able to put on an international spectacle that can stand back for no one. We should never be scared to say that we are living in a really, truly great country. And we like to party, right? So, people want to come here. We've got beautiful things like mountains and seas. And, if you go to other countries, it's boring. There's a stadium maybe, there's no backdrop. We've got all these things in place. And, I think we really should leverage this a lot more and try and bring more things in. And then we haven't even touched on the rest of Africa, because by having a license to host these things, we can host it throughout Africa as well. And there we've got to bring in our sister and brother countries and say, listen, join the party basically, and see how many more of these things we can do. It would be phenomenal.
So as a founding member yourself of the South African Padel Association, SAPA in short, what role do you think the association could play in shaping the future of paddle in the country? And how did your time on the board continues to contribute to this development process, ongoing development process? And in particular, I want you to touch on outreach towards previously disadvantaged communities, because there's some talent over there.
It's a difficult one. You see, let's take this in two parts. SAPA, South African Padel Association, is the governing board in South Africa. Again, if you refer to me, I started off right at base level. There was no one playing. Okay. Then again, you look at the trajectory of what's happening now. All right. Again, from one club, for example, you've now got numerous clubs, over 20 clubs nationally. Okay. That means that we've moved into hundreds of thousands of people playing paddle. If you've got 600 courts, I mean, you're literally looking at over 100,000 people registered on the app that is consistently playing. So that changes the game somewhat. And I think the game has grown a lot faster than what the board could keep up with at this stage. So there's a little bit of, let's call it strategic and paperwork that probably needs to, a restructuring of the board that needs to happen, which is currently happening. So that's the one side of things. How are they going to shape the future? As we sit here, we cannot define who is the number one player or the number one couple in South Africa. We've got a warm, fuzzy feeling of who that might be, but there's no what we call sanctioned tournaments where we can play and get points to say, okay, that couple has won X amount of tournaments and therefore they are definitely the number one couple in South Africa. You can't pick provincial sides, you can't pick national sides because you don't know who is the number one couple. You know, we've got a team that's now gone over to Hungary, but also them, and there was no selection process, you see. And then all of a sudden that then starts asking other questions. How did they get selected? Blah, 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 fish-based. It's important for these teams to go there. So that's a tick box. It's well done. But there's always going to be like these queries. So the role that SAPA plays is to try and get sanctioned tournaments, get a ranking system, seed this thing into schools. Once you've seeded it into schools, get provincial teams, national teams, and then start the process of playing against other teams internationally. So that's quite an important role. From a governance point of view, you also need to know, how do coaches interact? Can all people coach? Because that's also currently happening. We're living in the Wild West in paddle. You know, what should a court look like? Can a court be placed anywhere? You know, what is the rules of engagement? So that's their role that they need to play. From a grassroots level, it's not that easy because, again, the court costs quite a bit of money. And again, paddle isn't like tennis. Tennis, for example, you can pay one membership fee and play the entire year for 1,000 Rand or whatever it might be. Paddle, you pay every hour. So you pay 400 Rand an hour. So all of a sudden, it's not the same sum, you know. So to put that court in, let's call it Langa or, you know, Transkei or wherever you wanted to put this thing, somebody would have to fund it. There would have to be an appetite for someone to go and put that structure in there. Then there's things like steel, glass, equipment. You know, there's movable stuff. There's always been a concern, who looks after it? Who takes care of that court? If I had to go and put it into, I don't know, Mitchell's Plain here in the Western Cape, will it get damaged while I'm not there? If that does happen, who then looks after the court itself? So there's a lot of questions around how. How do we do these types of things? I think personally the answer is in the olden days we used to use wall. There was no glass that these paddle courts would use. There was no lighting, and they would use cement flooring. So that also brings the cost quite down. I think that's the way we're going to start doing it. But again, there's a CSI leg that a corporate company would have to come in and say, listen, here's X amount of money. Please roll these types of things out. And that would be a tax break on their side. We're not there yet, unfortunately. But we certainly are having conversations to try and get this up and running.
Okay, no, great stuff. Thanks. That was Luke Potter, a paddle coach founder of Sports Essence online shop and a director of A1Padel Tour in South Africa. Thank you for your time and insights, which is very much appreciated. That is where we would leave it for now. And thank you for watching SportX on the TalkX TV on YouTube and LinkedIn. Until next time, thank you.